On the midterm, you were tested on the different qualities of seventh chords, the qualities of the chords based on their Roman numeral in the key, and being able to identify chords in inversion and figure bass. All of this is taking us to our goal of being able to use chord symbols and Roman numerals to better understand a piece of music we might see or listen to. And from this point on in the semester, almost everything we'll look at is going to be in a broader context. We'll be looking at a short musical exercise, either a melody with chord symbols, or a fully fleshed piano score, and applying everything we know about chords, solfege, and Roman numeral analysis to that exercise. But before we do that, I want to ask you a very broad, almost philosophical question. How do we know what key a piece of classical music is in? Take a second to think about how you'd answer that. If you're listening to a piece of music that's in F major, like this little piece you see here, how do you know that it's in F major? What makes it sound like F major? You might have said the key signature. Well, the key signature definitely makes it look like F major, but I could have notated this without any key signature, just using accidentals, and it would still sound like F major. You might have said the notes in the scale, and that would definitely make sense, but D minor uses the exact same notes as F major, and this clearly isn't D minor. You also might have said something like the first note of the melody, the last note of the melody, the first chord of the piece, the last chord of the piece, or something else along those lines. Those are good places to look to get an idea of what you might be listening to, but composers don't always start a piece on a one chord. They don't even always end a piece on a one chord. So the question still remains, what exactly tells us the key of a piece of music? The mystery answer to this question lies somewhere in what we're going to talk about today, cadences. So, what is a cadence? In a nutshell, a cadence is the closing gesture at the end of a phrase. And when we talk about cadences, we're going to talk about them regarding the chords at the end of the phrases, specifically the last two chords of the phrase. Each of those chords could be assigned a Roman numeral, and those Roman numerals will tell us more about the kind of cadence taking place. There are lots and lots of different types of cadences out there, but we'll be looking at only the four most common types of cadences, which can be put into two categories, conclusive and inconclusive. What's the difference? A conclusive cadence sounds like the phrase is definitively done. The piece of music could stop right there and no one would complain. An inconclusive cadence, on the other hand, sounds like even though the phrase is finished, it's almost like an unanswered question. You need to hear more of the music to actually feel some closure. So, four types of cadences. Two of them will be conclusive cadences, the other two will be inconclusive. And here's where some new terminology comes our way. We'll start with the conclusive cadences first. Our most common type of conclusive cadence is what we call an authentic cadence. An authentic cadence consists of a dominant chord going to a tonic chord, 5-1. So in the key of F major, that will be this 5 chord, C, going to this 1 chord, F. If you're in a major key, that will be a major 1. In a minor key, it would be a minor 1. Something to remember, however, is that the 5 chord in an authentic cadence is always major. If you're in a minor key, you'll be using the harmonic minor form of the scale to get that leading tone, which will make your 5 chord a major triad. You might be asking, can either of these chords be a 7th chord? The answer is yes. The first chord of a cadence can certainly be a 7th chord, which would make this 5 chord a dominant 7th chord. The second chord of the cadence, however, is almost always just a triad, unless we're talking about jazz. Can these chords be in an inversion? Technically, yes, But remember that chords in inversion are less stable than they are in root position. So for composers to use them in a cadence is rather tricky. In this class, you'll only encounter inverted chords with one type of cadence specifically, which we'll talk about a bit later. So our authentic cadence is 5-1 at the end of a phrase. That end of a phrase part is very important. You'll find 5-1 motions everywhere in a piece of music, but not every single one of those motions can be called a cadence. Only the ones that end a phrase. But there's another way we can conclusively end a phrase with 2 chords, though this one is a lot less common. Let's swap the dominant chord for a subdominant chord, 4 going to 1. So in the key of F, this will be a B flat major chord going to F major. This sort of gesture you hear a lot in sacred music, usually as an amen tag to chorales and church hymns. We call this type of cadence a plagal cadence, spelled Plagal. Unlike the authentic cadence, plagal cadences don't use 7th chords in any kind of way. They also don't use chords in inversion at all, just a plain old 4 in root position, followed by a plain old 1. In major keys, both the 4 and the 1 will be major, and in minor keys, they'll both be minor. There is, however, a common trick a composer will play from time to time with conclusive cadences in minor keys. They'll take that last tonic chord, and instead of playing a minor chord, they'll play a major one. We call this a Picardy third, and it's especially common in plagal cadences. So those are our conclusive cadences. What about our inconclusive cadences? Our 2 inconclusive cadences, remember, are going to sound like they need to continue. So there's not going to be that final tonic chord we saw in authentic or plagal cadences. Our most common type of inconclusive cadence will actually end on a dominant chord. We call this a half cadence because it's essentially half of a conclusive cadence. A half cadence at the end of a phrase is any chord going to a root position 5 triad. Any chord. This is the one type of cadence we'll talk about that has multiple options for its first chord, so long as the second chord of the cadence is a root position dominant triad. Your most common contenders for this first chord are going to be the subdominant, scale degree 4, or your supertonic, scale degree 2, and it's really common to see the first chord in some type of inversion or other. But the really important thing is that you end the cadence with that strong root position 5 chord, and that 5 will always be a triad, never a 7th chord. Our last type of inconclusive cadence is particularly fun. The music sets us up for an authentic cadence, 5-1, but then fakes us out at the last minute by taking the 5 chord to a 6 chord instead. We call this type of cadence a deceptive cadence, because you're expecting that really conclusive 1 chord that only changes at the last minute. So a deceptive cadence is 5 going to 6 at the end of a phrase. Just like with authentic cadences, that 5 can be a 7th chord, and it must be a major 5 or dominant 7th. Remember, however, that the submediant, scale degree 6, is a different chord quality than the tonic. In major keys, 6 is a minor chord. In minor keys, 6 is a major chord. So don't let that throw you off. So those are the 4 different types of cadences we'll be examining throughout the rest of the semester. To recap, we have authentic cadences, 5-1, plagal cadences, 4-1, half cadences, anything to 5, and deceptive cadences, 5-6. The 5 chord in authentic and deceptive cadences can be a 7th chord, and the first chord of the half cadence can be just about anything, root position or in inversion. Again, always be careful that the qualities of your Roman numerals match the key that you're in. And lastly, remember the Picardy third option that we have in minor keys, changing that last tonic chord from minor to major. So thank you all for tuning in. We will discuss this more in depth on Wednesday, and I'm looking forward to seeing you then.